All right, so this morning we are going to review environmental issues and the real estate transaction. So we're going to talk about some of the basic environmental hazards that we need to know about, that we need to be aware of, right? We're going to talk about groundwater, the water table, provisions of the Safe Drinking Water Act, the issues with underground storage tanks, legal requirements, some of the regulations that are involved, and really the responsibilities and duties of real estate brokers and agents and so forth. So, do you have to be an expert on these hazardous substances? Yes or no?
No.
You don't have to be an expert, but you just have to have the basic idea or general idea of what it is, so you can educate your clients.
Right? And so you want to understand a little bit, maybe be aware, right? But you do not want to be giving these specific answers, questions, or even be careful of opinions when you're showing houses to people, because you really don't know what you're talking about, right? Even if you've been doing real estate for 25 years, unless you are certified in that particular area, you don't have the ability, you don't have the, I don't want to say permission, but you really are not expected to have the technical expertise, and most likely you don't have it. Now, if you're lead certified inspector and you want to talk with your client about lead, go for it. You're a lead certified inspector. If you have your home inspector's license and you want to be able to say, hey, listen, look at this, this, and this, and be really particular about it, go for it. But even I think that I know a lot about houses, right? But even when I'm with a client, I would be like, hey, this might be something we would want your inspector to look at. You see this rust in the circuit breaker box, or do you see, you see these joists, they look like they're soft and they look like there was some type of wood destroying insect there. Or do you see this white substance here surrounding these pipes? It looks like it might be asbestos, but we would have your inspector, talk with you about that. And really, that's the whole way. You always should be putting in those disclaimers, because otherwise you could find yourself having an issue, or your clients don't feel like you've given them the best advice, or maybe they feel like you shied them away or steered them away from that particular property. And so you have to be really careful with all those things, okay? So we know that when it comes to pollution and some of these hazardous substances, they affect, number one, of course, the attractiveness of the property, the safety, the desirability, and do you think it affects the market value?
Of course.
Yeah, definitely, of course. And we also know that there are also, what we're going to be going over mostly in this unit is federal laws or federal issues, concerns, ideas. We also know in your wonderful red book, you need to go over that because there are state of Connecticut issues and concerns that you need to be aware of. So the first substance that they list in your book here is asbestos, right? So what is asbestos?
It's a fire-resistant material they once used to strengthen other materials in the insulation, yada, 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 right?
Right, so it was used for insulation of pipes and different things. What else was it used for?
Floor tiles.
Right, floor tiles and so forth. Covering duct work, right? Covering hot water units. Now, it is, they say, also a fire-resistant material, and it's friable. So when we say friable, what do we mean?
You can bend it, break it, or disturb it. It can be moved.
Well, it can be moved, but what does it do with its friable?
It breaks up into dust or crystallizes.
That's right. So it breaks up into these little fibers, and then these fibers, if they're disturbed and they go into the air, what do? Go into your lungs. And really, when it comes down to it, it could cause, we believe definitely some very deadly, serious respiratory diseases. So that's important to know. Just 2 days ago, I forget, what is it, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was showing a few houses, and I showed one particular client 2 houses with asbestos tiles on the outside, right? And can you buy a house with asbestos tiles on the outside?
Sure. Yes.
Can you buy a house with asbestos in it?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So did anyone ever hear the story I told you about the doctor? Right. So here we are. There was this doctor. This is about 6-7 years ago. She's a pediatrician and she's got 3 kids. And so here we were looking at houses, and we looked at 5, 10, 15, 20 houses, and she couldn't find a house that she loved. Every single house, there was something wrong. And maybe it sounds like I'm being mean, but I'm not being mean. It's just that once the person gets to the 1-inch file, right? I don't know if you know what that is. That's basically every time I show a house, I have a piece of paper that I put in the file, or at least I used to. Now I'm mostly electronic. But I mean, it used to be like, oh my gosh, we're probably showed her like 30 something houses, right? And so now finally she's like, oh my God, this is the house for me. I love it. Blah, 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 blah. We need to make an offer right now. And I said, all right, definitely we can do that. And then we walk into the basement, and the house had steam radiator heating. So what does that mean? That means from the boiler system in the basement, it creates a steam through the pipes and it goes into the radiator. And most of the time, or at least in the past, those pipes were insulated with asbestos, right? And she said, I said, forget it. I said, I know you don't want to buy this house because it probably has asbestos. I mean, you can get it checked by the inspector, but take a look at these old radiator pipes. This is probably asbestos. And she was like, oh, that's no big deal. I'll still buy it. So I took a step back because I said, so-and-so, I'll call her Mary. Well, Mary, we just looked at a home, 2 hours ago that you also loved, but it had warm air heating units, the ductwork. And around the ductwork, where the ductwork, each piece, like a little puzzle, comes together, it had a strip of tape to keep it insulated. I said, and you didn't want to buy that house because it had asbestos, so why would you buy this house? So why do you think she thought it was okay to buy the house with the steam radiator? In her mind, and she's a pediatrician, in her mind, it's okay to buy the house with the steam radiators, pipes, insulated with asbestos, but not with the ductwork.
She thought the
Because
ductwork was
it's
going
in
to blow
the
through the house.
basement, directly blowing.
Okay, so yeah, her reasoning was like, well, when we use if you have asbestos around the ductwork, when the air flows through the ducts, it's going to pull up some of that asbestos and put it in the air, right? Which there is a chance of that happening. But when you have pipes that are insulated with asbestos, most of the time, if it's not disturbed, if it's not touched, you don't have a problem. And that was her reasoning. And she ended up buying the house and it wasn't an issue. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? Kind of this whole thing about asbestos, right? And so you do have to be really careful with that. There are a lot of federal and state guidelines and regulations on disposing it and how that works. And depending on the scenario, especially if you're doing some remodeling, you have to be careful because it could get really, really expensive. Now, one of the terms we need to know with asbestos is encapsulation. So what's encapsulation?
It's like covering it and sealing it from the outside world.
Right? So that's the whole thing about it. Let's just say you have tons and tons of asbestos in the basement. Well, they're not going to just start cutting it and putting it in plastic bags necessarily, because it could get in the air and then maybe it can go into some of the units, right? In some of the apartments, or it can go into the house, right? And so what they're actually going to do is they're going to put on their wonderful hazmat suits with the mask and everything. And then they're going to do like a bubble, right? The bubble, where seal it off. There's going to be plastic everywhere and it's going to be all sealed off. then they will start disturbing it and cutting it in order to remove it and get rid of it, right? So you have to understand that it can get expensive really, really quick, right? And it is dangerous for the people who work with it. There are certified asbestos inspectors. And remember, people buy houses every day with asbestos. We don't see it as much. When was asbestos stopped used? When was it banned?
1978.
1978. You got it, right? Which is what? 88, 98. What's that? 30, 50 years ago.
42 years. That's when my husband was
42.
born, so I remember it.
42 years ago. I don't know, 1978 doesn't seem like that long ago, but I guess it was 42 years ago. I was watching the pop 1970s music the other day. It was my favorite music. It's mostly my favorite. All right. So next substance we talk about here in the book, lead-based paint and other lead hazards. All right. So when was lead banned or stopped using in housing?
1978.
1970. So that's an important date to remember, right? So remember, asbestos, 1978, lead, 1978. They say that there's about 75% of the housing built before 1978 has lead in it. Do people buy houses with lead in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do people rent apartments with lead in it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was lead used for?
Was in paint, stains, and varnishes.
Okay, so why did they use it in paints?
It's pigment and a drying agent.
That's right.
And oil-based paints, right?
Yep. So, you know, basically for pigments, right, to get the coloring, and then to help it dry. They also used it in a lot of piping, right? Now, when we say piping, you know, plumbing, we're usually, you know, I mean, the vast majority of the time, it's not used for water supply, right, where you get the water from it. It's used mostly for the drainage of the water. And there's still a lot of, I mean, houses, even the house I have, there's still a lot of houses that have the water drainage or the water discharge pipes with lead or lead filling, lead solder, and all that sort of thing. Okay. Now the issue is that also our soil or our groundwater can get contaminated with lead, and that's one of the big things. Okay. So one of the issues that come up is the whole thing about what does lead do to people. So it can result in damage to the brain, the nervous system, the kidneys, blood, and really when it comes down to it, children, right, younger than 6 are their bodies, they're very vulnerable to it, right? So if you are one of these children, or if you have one of these children, don't get mad at me, we're just having a little fun, but you know there are certain kids, and I've had people like this in my class, and we laugh about it, that they're prone to want to chew on windowsills or chew on trim work in houses.
Yeah, mine.
Yep. Okay. Or, you know the way kids are. I mean, I probably was one of these kids. I remember when I was a kid, my mother bought me like the Fred Flintstone vitamins. I took the whole bottle, went in the basement and ate them like it was candy, man. I was just sitting there eating the whole thing of Fred Flintstone vitamins. She was freaking out. Or the kids go outside and they see these little white or tan or whatever color paint chips. And they're like, oh, I wonder what this tastes like. And there could be lead in it, the paint chips. And so that's why it gets a little bit dangerous. You have to be careful about what the kids are eating, what they're putting in their mouth, because of course, if they're putting lead and then they have higher elevations of lead in their body, they're going to have some issues, which gets a little bit scary, okay? So number one, and it's a federal law, when you're selling a property, right, you have to disclose, and here's the tricky part about things, what you know about lead. If you're renting a property and you're the landlord, you have to disclose what you know about lead being in a property. So if you've never had a test done, which that's the vast majority of the properties, right? You just never get a test done of the from a lead certified inspector, then it is unknown, right? It is unknown. So is it that as a landlord, do you ever have to do a lead test on your property?
In Connecticut,
In Connecticut, what? I'm sorry, I think you're going in and out, or hopefully it's not my internet connection again.
in Connecticut, yes, you do.
All the time?
Well,
I don't know how often.
It says known information on the yellow book, right? So if you know, but don't ask, don't tell.
Well, see, that's the sad but true part of it. But here was kind of like the question that I asked you was a little gauge to see how many of you spent a little bit of time in this red book, right? Because remember, I'm hoping that most of the time, and I know we all have things going on in our life and things get crazy and blah, 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 but 80% of the time, I need you to be reading these units before the class, at least once, even if you skim through it, take a few notes, do a few highlights. So the point is in Connecticut, if a child is found to have elevated lead levels in their blood and they're renting, then the landlord would be required to do a lead inspection, lead test. Right? So that's a big thing to know about, especially if you're thinking about getting into investment properties and what you want to do and how you want to do it. But the vast majority of the time is like, okay, you don't know, you never had it tested, so it's an unknown scenario. But as a federal law, you do have the right to do you have a 10-day opportunity to do a lead inspection if you want to. And most people will waive it. And in 19 years, 20 years of real estate, maybe I've seen it happen like twice, 3 times. Very, very rarely will people do a lead test on the property. Okay. So again, landlords have to disclose what they know. Sellers have to disclose what they know. Buyers have the 10-day opportunity to do a risk assessment or inspection of the property. And real estate professionals, which we do this pretty easy because now especially it's electronically, but that's what I do, mostly electronically. We'll give you a pamphlet or flyer and just basically kind of just email it to you along with the disclosure saying, hey, you can sit down and if you want to fall asleep really quick, and you can read this pamphlet that says, protect your family from lead in your home. And hey, I love my family to death and I know it's pretty important. I'm not trying to make light of it, but I'm sure very, very few people even read this pamphlet, but that's there. And we're supposed to provide buyers and renters or lessees with this particular pamphlet, right? Make sense? Now, anybody who's paid to perform work that disturbs painting in housing, schools, and so forth must be trained and certified. Okay, so if you are a painter, right, or you decide to do a little part-time job as a painter and you are out in the front porch and you're scraping paint and you're doing all this good stuff and now there's paint chips going on the ground, right, and a building inspector or someone from the town or state comes by, could you maybe get into some trouble? Yes. Because you're not certified and you're letting the paint chips go on the ground, and the people who are trained and certified know that you have to put down plastic and all the paint chips, because those paint chips will sooner or later get into the ground and affect our groundwater. So that's why it's really kind of a big deal. And this includes residential rental property managers, owners, general contractors, renovation, repair, that sort of thing. Okay. If you do know anything about lead, you are required to make sure that you disclose those things. And most of the time, if you're a landlord type of person, you know, you'll be in touch with the town, and every few months or maybe once a year, they'll get some, whether it's state or federal funding with grant money for you to do lead abatement in your properties. You know, and the money usually goes pretty fast, at least in the towns around here. Of course, there's no like set law or set rule where it's a definite, but I can tell you that I've seen a lot of people who over the years have gotten that grant money. Okay, so who's got questions on lead? Everyone feel comfortable with lead? All right, and in your book, it's going to show you the disclosure of information on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards, the actual federal form. And this is a federal document. I mean, I'll just show it to you really quick. Right? That's a federal form that we need and should be using. All right, so make sure you're familiar with it. Now we got the wonderful world of radon, right? So what is radon?
Radioactive gas.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting because when I first started real estate and I started teaching the class, it used to say the decay of fossil fuels in the book. And to me, fossil fuels means like the decay of dinosaur bones or other types of bones, right? So I guess that's not necessarily exactly true anymore. Now in your book, and I've done a little bit of research and talked to a couple of people, it says the decay of other radioactive substances. So I'm not trying to get weird on you, but how does something become weird? How is something radioactive? So technically, it has to come from space to be radioactive, right? Like that's.
I think they call it terrestrial radiation.
The what?
I think it's actually called, like if you want to go onto the science end of it, terrestrial radiation.
What does that mean?
It comes from space.
That's right, it comes from space. So if it comes from space, it means it had to be some kind of meteorite or whatever, all those things, asteroids, meteorites, all that good stuff, right? So something comes from space, somehow it gets radioactive, hits the earth, spreads throughout the ground and all that good stuff. And the thing about it is that they say it's natural, right? Naturally occurring, colorless, odorless, tasteless, right? Now, do we have some women in this class? We do,
Yeah.
the last time I checked, right? And so now the women are on point for this next question. And if you're not, you have to start learning about the wonderful women that have done some great things in this world for scientific discoveries. So, how is radon measured? How's radon measured? What's it called?
Action level of
So it's called, I'll give you a little
Picocurie.
picocurie, and it was named after who?
Madam Curie.
Madam Curie, right? So it's measured in picocuries, which is like a unit of radiation that she discovered how to measure it and so forth, Madam Curie. And basically they say that you have to be 0.4 picocuries per liter or less in order for it to be acceptable. Now, they say that, and I don't know if it says it in your book, but they say that radon is the second largest or second highest cause of lung cancer, you know, besides smoking, right? At least that's what I've read, that's what I've heard in the past. So, I mean, I could tell you, I think it's a little bit, there's a lot of things about when they test radon that I don't necessarily like, you know, I don't want to use the word agree with or believe in because, you know, that stuff doesn't make sense. But here's the whole story. When they're going to measure radon in a house, like let's say you're going to buy a home, well, you're going to have an inspector and they're either going to put a machine, some sort of box in the basement to measure the radiation coming through. and staying in the area, or they're going to put some kind of like canister that has like some type of charcoal absorption material, and then they're going to figure that out. But if the seller opens up the windows, will it affect how much radon's in the house?
Yep.
Of course. If the seller opens up the door from the basement so that air can escape through the basement, will it affect it? Of course. If you have a raised ranch where there's not necessarily most of the time a door, you know, that separates the lower level from the high level, is that going to give you a different reading? Of course. If you have a walkout basement that you open up the sliding door, you have a garage that's opened up all the time, of course it's going to affect it. Okay, so then my next question to you is, generally speaking, right? So that's the key word. Generally speaking, what types of homes will have higher levels of radon? New homes or old homes?
Old homes.
So you like old, anybody else?
I'm gonna go with new only because years ago when I was doing building, we did a new construction home, and it actually we had to put in a radon mitigation system because as soon as we were done with the foundation, they're like, "Oh yeah, now you got radon."
How old is old?
Right. So generally speaking, new homes will have higher levels of radon because of the way we build homes now. So what does that mean? Right? Old homes, there's more cracks in the foundation because remember, radon's coming in usually from underneath and then going throughout the house, right? So old homes, they might have cracks in the foundation. They might have between the foundation and the house, that's your sill, right? There might be, there's more places for it to escape. Like, you know how they say, oh, this is an old home, has a lot of drafts. Well, those drafts allow the radon to escape. Where brand new homes are built so tight, where we have the vapor barrier, we have the Tyvek, we have the better insulation. So the radon for new homes comes in the house a lot of times, it has nowhere to go out. So when
I have one of those, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have one of those radon, I don't know, that tube thing that they dig down in the foundation and it goes up through the roof.
Yep.
And I have the bubble up water system as well.
Yep.
My home is an older home.
Yep.
So that's why I said old home.
Yep. So that's why I said generally speaking, right?
Okay.
So but here's the story is so you mentioned a couple of good things that we're going to talk about. When I first started real estate and people started doing, I mean, maybe they were doing it before then too, but I mean, I've been doing real estate about 20 years, right? And when I first started and we found out that a home had radon, it was like, oh my God, it's going to be such a big deal. We got to do this. You know, they have to put a pipe. Pipe has to go a little bit higher than the roof line. You got to put a in and they got to go in the foundation and da 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 da. Now it's like not even a big deal, and it's not even really that expensive. They really have to put a pipe under the foundation area to pull in the air, and then they have a blower fan that blows it out. In fact, most builders, to mitigate the scenario or to make it easier, they automatically, when they build the foundation and build the house, a lot of times they put the piping there so that it's just ready to do it if you need to do it. And then the other thing, which is kind of, I don't want to say newer, because maybe somebody who's been doing real estate longer can say, oh no, that was a long time ago. But what I've seen anyways is the whole thing about radon in water, right? And people who have wells. And so they have what we call a water trickle system. Most people, or a lot of people, water bubbling or trickling system, where it takes the water so that the air from the radon gas can escape from the air and go out the blower, and then the water can go into the house. Right? So it's kind of interesting, some of this stuff. You know, one of the things that I want you to remember is when you're taking the state exam, you're going to read a question and you're going to be excited and you want to get this thing done, the state exam, and you just read it quick and you are going to try to get, well, take that extra second to really understand the question, to really understand the question. And that way, you won't get necessarily confused with, well, what's the difference between radon and carbon monoxide? Because you see, both of them are colorless, tasteless, and gases, right? And even odorless, right? In many cases, I mean, depending on the scenario. So you want to make sure both of those are gases. You want to make sure that you understand radon comes from radioactive substances, where carbon monoxide usually comes from what? Anybody have an idea? And we're going to go over that in a minute, but I just want to get this out really
Like
quick.
wood stoves, that type of.
Yeah, and it comes from incomplete combustion. So remember, radon, radioactive substances, carbon monoxide, incomplete combustion. And we'll talk about carbon monoxide in about 10 minutes, or less, probably 5 minutes. Next one in your book, because we want to stay with the book so everybody feels more comfortable, right? Formaldehyde. So what is formaldehyde?
I don't have that next. I have mold.
Oh, I guess depends what you
So it's used as a preservative.
right? So the first thing about it, yes, it's used as a preservative, and it has such an odor about it that if you ever smelt it, I don't think you'll ever forget it. You know, I worked at UPS for about 14 years in management and all that good stuff. I mean, I remember one time we were working in the, I was working in the warehouse or the distribution center, whatever you want to call it. And a 5-gallon bucket that we found out it was going to go to UConn Medical Center, had all these little dead baby rabbits, but it was filled with formaldehyde. It broke open on one of the belts. And these belts, that are carrying packages, they go throughout the whole building. So in about like 5-10 minutes, the thing broke open. In about 5-10 minutes, that smell was throughout the whole building. We had to shut down the whole shift for like an hour or two, because the smell was such a strong chemical smell. It was like, I don't know, I still remember that smell to this day, right? And they say that smell, it's a probable human carcinogen, which can cause cancer, right? And it can cause respiratory problems, eye, skin irritations. Is it against the law to use formaldehyde? Is it banned? No, right? So formaldehyde is still used, and it's even used in wood, where they say pressed board and that sort of thing. Plywood, particle board to preserve it and so forth. Even we have what's called urea formaldehyde foam insulation, right? And that's called UFFI. Once popular, then banned, and now legal again, but it's rarely used. And that was used in like some types of insulation and that sort of thing. So who's got questions on formaldehyde? Anyone? All right. Carbon monoxide, again, colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. And how does it occur?
Incomplete combustion.
Incomplete combustion. So remember, I mean, I still remember to this day, I don't know why, especially on a cold winter day, and you get out of school or you're going into school and you walk by one of those buses and the exhaust, and it's just like, boom, comes right in your face. I don't know, must have happened to me when I was like 5 or 10 years old, because I still remember that. And that's incomplete combustion. Some sort of fuel, whether it's oil or gas or whatever, gets mixed up with everything in the engine, and then it doesn't completely disintegrate everything, right? And so that carbon monoxide, right, it could come from wood, oil, natural gas, quickly absorbed by the body, right? And as it increases in your body, basically people can die. Now, I haven't heard recently anything, but I remember years ago, you'd hear, even in the summertime, right? With air conditioning's not working correctly, or people closing the house, sealing it up, and then they pass away from carbon monoxide poisoning. And that's why even when it comes to the boilers and the heating systems in your house, right, you have to make sure that they're being the exhaust from them, or your hot water heater, the exhaust from them is going out your chimney without a problem, because it could create carbon monoxide in the house. All right, so improper ventilation is a big issue for carbon monoxide. Who's got questions on that? All right, what are PCBs?
Chemical compounds used in electrical equipment, so it can be in like refrigerators or like machinery, older equipment, that kind of.
That's right, polychlorinated biphenyls. Okay, so I don't know, I'm not going to get weird on you, because believe me, I'm not into all kinds of weird, crazy stuff. But every time I go over this section and I read it, just maybe the way that it's written or whatever, it just kind of amazes me, and like my mind can't wrap around it. Because here's what it says: consists of more than 200 chemical compounds that are not found naturally in nature. So if you really think about it, which is really weird, and maybe you're gonna think that I'm going off the deep end a little bit, but we're on this Zoom right now, we're on our computers and our phones and everything, but like this came from the earth. I mean, unless you believe something otherwise, and you maybe you have a supply of something I don't know about, right? But like this stuff came from the earth, but by men and women, or humans, right, mixing so many things together, which is amazing to me, right? How they, if I'm walking through the woods, later today to take a hike, how do I get this? It's just, I don't understand it exactly, right? But that's what it is. Chemical upon chemical upon chemical mixed together to help us put together all these things. And so these are become like flame resistant. They're used in transformers, caulking, right? Motors in refrigerators, hydraulics, and all that good stuff, right? And again, it was banned in 1979 using these things. But then the crazy part is, so this came from the earth, and if it has PCBs, can I destroy it 100% so that it doesn't somehow pollute the earth? So what do I have to do, right, to destroy a PCB?
Burn it. Really hot.
At what temperature?
2,400 degrees.
Okay, so here we are, when it's 90 degrees, humans, we're kind of going a little bit nutty. When it's 100 degrees, you might as well forget it. When it's like 120, I think we end up passing out, right? But you have to burn these PCBs at, so we said 120 degrees. You have to burn them at 2,400 degrees is the only known way to destroy them. I think it's pretty wild. I don't know. You tell me, maybe I'm getting a little bit crazy for you, but it's pretty wild that we can create these things from the earth, and then in order to find a way to make them safe again, we have to, do something that's extreme, extreme, extreme. All right, so who's got questions on polychlorinated biphenyls? Right, and so what they say is that they can be carcinogenic, and these chemicals have been implicated in lower fertility and shortened lifespans. All right, what are CFCs? Anybody know?
Non-flammable chemicals used in refrigerators, air conditioners, freezers, etc. Aerosol sprays, paints, solvents.
All right, so you don't all have to answer me, right? You don't have to answer, but we know that there's some of you out there that you still wish you could use the Aquanet hairspray. You don't have to answer. And, so think about it, those hairsprays and those things that are used in foam blowing applications, solvents, and so forth, those are CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and they say, right, that they deplete the ozone layer,
Mhm.
right? They deplete the ozone layer, and that we have to find ways to get rid of them. Okay. Then we have the wonderful world of mold. Anybody know what mold looks like? Right? I mean, sometimes you can see mold and you know it's mold, but I can tell you a lot of times I'm showing a house to someone, they think that they see mold, but it's really not, right? It could be like, for instance, in the basement where there's effervescence really that comes out of the concrete, that is part of the, like, a residual for a chemical or lime and so forth in the concrete, and people think that it's mold, right? So you have to be careful making sure that people understand, well, what's mold and then what's not mold. But mold has to grow on some sort of organic substance, right? There has to be moisture, oxygen, organic food source. So that's why when you do have a leaky pipe, when you do have some sort of sitting water, you need to clean it up, get rid of it right away, fix leaky pipes, because it can definitely gradually build mold in many cases, right? And it creates issues, right? It's where we talk about respiratory. And that's where I have to become a wimp every now and then. You know, it happened maybe, I think it was last Friday.
Blue shirt.
I had to be a wimp.
You iron it?
Yep. Mute that. All right. So I, you know, and many times during the week, I'm showing homes to investors, right? And many times I walk into the house and you can just tell right away that there's mold, right? And I grew up younger. I mean, thank God the last 20 years, it really hasn't been an issue for the most part. But I grew up with bad asthma, and as soon as that mold gets on me in my respiratory, I don't want to end up in the hospital. And so I tell the investors, hey, I'm sorry, bud, but I got to go stand outside. I hope you don't mind. And, you know, of course, I got to take a little bit of ribbing from these guys, because usually there's 1 or 2 or 3 guys together. And they're like, oh, this smells like money to me. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, that's good for you. I'll be outside just standing there waiting, because I'm not going to put myself in that scenario. Mold, you know, you can deal with it in some cases, but sometimes it's really, really bad, and you can feel it and smell it in the house right away. So you have to be careful, because it can definitely cause, you know, health problems, and you don't want to end up having to be in a hospital for 3, 5, 7 days because you know, you're breathing all this mold. You know, so just be careful with that. You know, you have to have really good ventilation and so forth, making sure there's no roof leaks and so forth. So who's got questions about mold? Anyone? All right, let's talk about groundwater. Okay, so water that exists under the Earth's surface forms the water table, the natural level at which the ground is saturated, right? And of course, water's gonna be coming from runoff. There could be waste disposal sites, septic systems, dry wells. You know, I mean, there's water coming from all kinds of places. And so that's why, you know, they basically, the Safe Water Drinking Water Act was put into place, right, to protect the health, public health, regulating the water supply and so forth. So things can get pretty crazy quick with the water supply. I haven't seen anything huge in Connecticut, but we've heard about, you know, Detroit and some other states, or Michigan and some other states where there's water problems, and then the government doesn't really necessarily able to do anything quick about it, or doesn't do anything quick about it. I mean, God forbid this starts happening here in Connecticut. It would be like, I think it's a really big thing, because I am that person, right? And you're going to think I'm crazy, but my kids think I'm crazy. I'm that person that when I want to drink water, I go to the sink and get a glass of water. Okay? I'm not going to be buying water every single day in my life. I buy the water that comes out of the sink. But all you people who are into Poland Springs and this one and that one, guess what? That's just somebody turning on a faucet in New York or in Pennsylvania or in New Hampshire or something, in my opinion. I know some of you are like, oh no, I would never drink the water from my sink. Well, guess what? In East Hartford, we have good water. But the day that it goes bad, I'm gonna be mad. Especially I've been paying all this money for water. Water, you know, fresh water is getting very, very expensive. And if you are thinking about buying a multifamily property, that's something you have to account for. Because most of the time, right, the landlord pays for cold water. Now, I'm not talking about if it's a single family house you're renting out, because you can have the renter pay that cold water because they're 100% using that meter. But if it's a 2, 3, 4, 5 family and so forth, most of the time there's still only one water meter. And by Connecticut law, you can't say, oh, I'm going to charge, there's 5 units, so I'm going to charge each tenant 20%. For residential, you cannot do that. For commercial, you can, but not for residential. Okay. And so cold water is getting very, very expensive. In fact, you know, they pulled a little thing that, you know, which I think is probably better, but they go up on the prices every couple of years. But it used to even be that you'd pay quarterly. Now people are paying monthly for your cold water. Right. So the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed in 1974, amended in 1986 and in 1996. Right. Who is the one that sets the health-based standards and all this good stuff for drinking water? Who knows? What
EPA. The EPA.
What is the EPA?
Environmental Protective Agency.
You got it, right? So they're the ones who are setting the standards, right? They're the ones who are going to even be watching things, maybe talking about the laws and doing training and getting funding for water improvements and that sort of thing. We also have the wonderful world of the Wetlands Protection, right? Making sure that under the authority of the Clean Water Act, the EPA is concerned with protecting and improving the quality of wetlands, right? Swamps, marshes, bogs, wet meadows, river overflows, making sure that the purple spotted turtle does not get extinct, right? And we want to make sure, you know, we were given the authority to take care of this world, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing that, and that's what we should be doing, in my opinion, right? So that's part of the wetlands protection. Next section is all about USTs. So what are USTs?
Underground storage tanks.
Underground storage tanks. Can you buy a house?
Underground
What's that?
storage.
Right? So can you buy a house with an underground storage tank?
Yes.
Yes. Very rarely does it happen these days. The last time I had someone buy a house with an underground oil tank was probably like 4 years ago. I was gonna say probably 3 or 4 years ago. Because you don't see them very often anymore, but there's still some houses that have it, right? And so when it comes to underground storage tanks, there's what's called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, federal law that gives the EPA authority to develop a program for proper management of storage tanks. So if you have an oil tank in your basement or even in the ground in your house, are you under these rules from the EPA? No. Why not?
Because it's not dug underground, it's freestanding in your home.
That's not the reason why necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, it could be. Yes, all right, I'll give that to you. But if it's
Personal property.
a huge tank that's in the basement of this commercial building, right? It's probably going to be put under the rules and regulations of the RCRA. But you know, I guess it depends, because it does say tanks on or above the floor of underground areas such as basement or tunnels. The whole point is there's a lot of exemptions. So let's talk about this. First off, we can talk about well, what are the requirements, right? What are the things that you have to do? Okay, so it applies to hazardous substances that store at least 10% of their volume underground. Okay, and we're talking about they have to track, monitor requirements for installation, maintenance, corrosion prevention, overspill prevention, monitoring, and record keeping. So when I think of this kind of thing, right, I'm usually thinking of like a gas station. That's pretty simple, right? Or you can think about, you know, like again, I worked at UPS and they have like, you know, some big tanks that they might use either with natural gas or petroleum or oil or whatever, gasoline or whatever, and so forth, that they're using for the trucks. And so those, I remember there were guys from maintenance who had to like keep all these logs of every little thing that happened with these tanks. And if there was a spill, God forbid it, it would be a big EPA, OSHA thing and all that good stuff. But there are exemptions. So number one, tanks that hold less than 110 gallons, right? Now, most oil tanks for heating houses is about 275 gallons. Also, farm and residential tanks that hold 1,100 gallons or less of motor fuel used for non-commercial purposes. Tanks that store heating oil burned on the premises. Tanks on or above the floor of underground areas such as basements or tunnels. And so that's why I was saying when someone had mentioned, well, if it's in a basement, it probably doesn't apply, which is true. But if it's some huge commercial thing, then it probably would apply. And then septic tanks and systems for collecting stormwater and wastewater. So that's the whole thing about USTs. You know, usually you're going to find them in commercial and industrial properties. And of course, you want to be really careful about making any specific comments or saying, oh, yeah, you don't have to worry about that sort of thing, because they're going to think that you're just saying that. So they buy the property, and then you could be basically held liable for making false disclaimers or false statements. So what kind of questions do you have about USTs? All right, let's keep on rolling. Waste disposal sites. So what's a waste disposal site? Would anybody know? Anybody from the Hartford area? Anybody ever drive through Hartford?
Yeah, it's a terrible landfill on 91.
Oh my gosh. And you know how terrible is it that it's also right near the river?
Yeah.
You think it probably pollutes the Connecticut River in your opinion?
Sure.
In my opinion, it does, right? We're not supposed to make false accusations, but come on.
Yeah.
Water that's going right on there. So some of the things about it is, you know, we're talking about waste disposal sites. We're talking about dumps, right? We're talking about how to get rid of, you know, types of waste. And so what's the process by which they create these waste disposal sites, at least what they're supposed to be doing? So the first thing they need to do is have a big hole, right? And what are they supposed to line that hole with so that it doesn't go into our water supply?
Clay or a synthetic material.
Yep, some type of clay or synthetic liner, right? Then of course they're going to put the dirt, and then they're going to put waste, and then they're going to put the dirt, and then they're going to put waste, right, and so forth. But also, while they're doing that, they're supposed to be putting what in there?
Pipes.
Yeah, drainage pipes, right? And there's really a couple different types of pipes. There's pipes, of course, for the water, but there's also pipes for the natural gas, because they like a ventilation pipe, right? And you know, that's basically for making sure that, you know, the accumulated natural gases are going out, right? And so then they can go even as high, like they say, as far as several hundred feet high, which if you're going down 91, you pretty much see that, right? And it's called a process, finally, called capping, right? The process of laying 2 to 4 feet of soil over the top of the site, then planting grass on it. Right now, I don't know of any places around here, but they tell you in your book that there's been capped landfills used as parks and golf courses and maybe even housing developments or offices.
It's terrible.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But you also have to wonder, like, with the billion of people, you know, how many billion people, 6 billion people in this world, what happens with all the garbage and everything? It kind of gets a little bit crazy if you really think about it. So that's the whole thing about capped landfills. Now, if we start talking about maybe those PCBs or nuclear hazardous wastes and so forth, where do they put those?
Brownfields.
Well, hopefully
Sealed
not.
container.
Yeah, sealed containers called what? What are they
The
called?
brownfields?
No,
Two.
we didn't get to the
Two.
brownfields. I think somebody said it, tombs, right? So that's in italics under waste disposal sites, probably like the second to the last paragraph. Some materials such as radioactive waste are sealed in containers buried deep underground and placed in tombs designed to last thousands of years, and they're in remote locations. So, you know, they're probably, the sad part is probably like out Midwest or in the deserts and stuff like that. Right? So those things don't escape. Okay. Now we have the world of brownfields. So here's how I get to have a little bit of fun. I don't know why I think it's fun to say it, but it is to me. They're defunct, derelict. Like, what does that mean? Brownfields are derelict. Defunct, derelict, or abandoned commercial or industrial sites. What does it mean that it's derelict? Anybody see that?
Dysfunctional, something.
Yeah, dysfunctional. So defunct, derelict, or abandoned commercial or industrial sites. And so we have the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfields Revitalization Act in 2002, right? Which basically will allow tax incentives to get these properties back. So in central Connecticut, or especially here in East Hartford, you know, one organization that I think has done a pretty incredible job is Goodwin College, because they've taken so much land on the East Hartford, Glastonbury line side of the river, right? That was all pretty much, or a lot of it, we believe, was polluted. And they understood how to get the funding and the federal grant money and all that good stuff and get a lot of that land cleaned up. But now they own some really prime real estate looking at the Hartford skyline, which is actually really nice, right? And so there's a lot of tax incentives that have to do with that. It will also shield innocent developers from liability that maybe existed at a site beforehand. So that's important stuff to know. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay. So really, when it comes to environmental issues, liability is a big deal. Like, who's responsible? When was the land actually polluted? Who's going to clean it up? Who's going to pay for it? And so forth. Right. And so that's where we came up with CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, created in 1980, and they created what's called the Superfund. So what is the Superfund?
Provides money to clean up hazardous waste sites.
Right? So money that's clean up the hazardous sites, right? And how does the money get there? How's the money get into the Superfund? Anybody have an idea? Anybody going to work today or went to work? Anybody going to work today or went to work yesterday?
Our taxes.
Go to work and you got to pay what on the money you made? Taxes. So the money comes there from, the majority of the money comes from us taxpayers. And they started it with how much money? about 1.6 billion. Now, there used to be about 1.6 billion is how it started. How much money is in there right now? That's what I was looking for. Here we go. Right now, well, as of February 26, 2020, they said the balance of the super fund is right now about $3.4 billion. Right? So that money that we're paying for our taxes is going into there to help out these people clean up their land. Right? Which, you know, it's pretty crazy. So that's why it's important to find out when we have environmentally polluted lands, who the PRPs are. So what's a PRP?
Potentially responsible parties.
That's right, potentially responsible party, okay? So basically the potentially responsible party are going to be ordered to take responsibility, okay? And so when we talk about this, is the landowner, if you buy a piece of land, right, and it's found to be environmentally polluted, maybe you bought it last month or 1 year ago or 5 years ago, are you responsible for cleaning it up? Or should I say, are you responsible to pay for the cleanup?
If the owner before you knew, then they're responsible.
So that's
Everyone
kind
who's
of
ever
one
owned the
point.
property.
That's kind of another point. So that's where I'm trying to go to with this whole thing that you need to know about, where we talk about SARA and so forth. Basically, there's criteria, right? There's criteria as to who is going to be exempted or not. So number one, let's say you buy this property. I'm trying to get, you know, there's a lot here and I'm trying to get it into an example where we can understand 100% or as much as possible. So number one, you buy this piece of property, right? So they're gonna, and let's say you're in front of a judge, there's criteria, or you're in front of this committee, who are you responsible or not? So number one, can you show that the pollution was caused by a third party or that you did not cause the pollution? Like it wasn't caused by you and maybe it wasn't caused by the previous person, or you can show who was caused by, right? Was the property acquired by you after the pollution happened, right? Now, the third point under SARA, the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, is does the landowner, let's say that's you, right? Do you have any actual or constructive knowledge of the damage that was done? So what is actual and constructive knowledge? Who knows what constructive knowledge is? Anyone? Anybody knows what constructive knowledge is? Okay, well, let's put it this way. When you buy a piece of property, should you or are you kind of obligated to do your, especially when it comes to commercial, your due diligence? What does due diligence mean? What are some of the things that you should do?
You should educate yourself about the purchase of, you know, go online, look at the assessor's links, and try to get a general knowledge of what you're getting into, your due diligence. Educate yourself.
Educate, right? And so, what if you bought this property and you didn't go to the town records or the state records? You checked nothing out about it, right? You just bought it because you had your real estate agent and you had an attorney and you feel like, well, I don't have to really do anything. You know, nobody told me that it was polluted, that 5 years ago, 10 50-gallon drums of oil bursted open over there. Nobody told me that. And I don't see anything like that. Nobody told me. But let's just say it's in the town records that it was, you know, 10 50-gallon drums of oil were leaking there for over a period of years and blah, 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 blah. Do you have knowledge? Now, do you have constructive knowledge about that? Yes, because that's public record. See, constructive knowledge basically means that, okay, whether it's the town or the county or the region or the state, right? That there is something in the public records that if you went to look for it, you would see it, and it's worldwide public knowledge, so that you do have constructive knowledge. You can't say, well, my real estate agent didn't tell me, my lawyer didn't tell me, the seller didn't tell me, so I'm not responsible. No, because most likely, in many cases, do you think in the past that, you know, somebody had $1 million property, they know that it was polluted, so they're selling it for $300,000? And are there deals out there too good to be true? Yeah. And you might have bought that property. You didn't do your due diligence, or maybe you did, but you don't want to admit it. You kind of know, but you didn't know, right? Because you knew that somebody told you about it, but you didn't. You said, well, my real estate agent, the seller, nobody told me, so it must not be true. And I'm going to buy this $1 million property for $300,000, thinking that you're being a little bit of a smart aleck, right? So again, that's a big thing. The landowner had no actual, which we kind of know the word actual, right? Or constructive, meaning public records knowledge. Also, the next point, due care was exercised. Well, what does due care or due diligence mean? That basically means like, hey, did you do an inspection? Do you have to do an inspection by law? No. But you should be doing that, at least at the minimum, what they call a phase 1, where somebody does the public record search for you, somebody walks the property for you and gives you a determination as if there was or is any pollution right now. So you could say, well, I paid this guy, you know, $1,500 or $2,500 to do a phase 1, and they didn't find anything. And he said he searched the public records and he walked the property and he's certified and blah, 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 blah. So you're probably going to be covered. But if you didn't do any of that because you don't want to know, right, then that becomes an issue. And was reasonable precautions taken in the exercise of ownership rights? So again, did you talk to people? Did you understand exactly what you were getting into? Did you know that it used to be a dry cleaning company where they had waste of dry cleaning chemicals? Did you know that it was an auto body shop where there was waste of auto body or furniture refinishing, right? So those are like the main things, like auto repair, auto body, furniture refinishing, dry cleaning, those types of companies that are using like really heavy duty chemicals that get into our groundwater. So that's what SARA is all about, creating what they call the innocent landowner immunity status. So who's got questions with all that we just went over? So that's going to be the criteria that's looked at as to whether you can be held innocent or not. And if you didn't do your due diligence, you didn't check on things, maybe you didn't do a phase 1, you could still be held responsible for the cleanup. And you might be like, well, I didn't do it. I just owned the land for 2 years and da, 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 da. Yes, but when you bought the land or the property, did you do these things in order for you to be held innocent? I have people in the past, they bought properties like a garage or a industrial property, and they didn't want to do any testing because they knew, you know, okay, this property should be going for $800,000 and it's being sold for $400,000. And so I actually have them sign a document saying that they understand that we always recommend that they do an inspection, and that they're going to hold me and they're going to hold Berkshire Hathaway Commercial Group harmless. And that way, you know, they can't come back and say, oh, well, my real estate agent told me not to do it. That's why I didn't do it. And now all of a sudden we're involved in some kind of crazy, you know, accusation or lawsuit. Make sense? Anybody have any questions on any of those things, topics? All right, so you, as a real estate professional, avoiding liability, that's a big thing, right? making sure somebody doesn't hold you liable. So you should be somewhat familiar. You should look for signs of contamination and, you know, maybe make mention of it to your particular client, right? Suggest for inspections, make sure there's contingencies involved, and really don't give exact technical advice. Now, here's the tricky thing that you might not have even thought about. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You might be thinking, oh, I got to really make sure I take care of my buyers and explain to them about doing an inspection and explain to them about, you know, not giving them exact advice and all that good stuff. Well, what about if you're selling a particular property? So if we have, especially commercial, this is what we're really talking about. We have a commercial listing, right? And somebody makes an offer on the property. In many cases, or basically in almost all cases, I'm going to have a discussion and have the seller sign a document that says, hey, it's up to them if they, meaning up to the seller, if they want to allow the buyer to do an inspection because it could affect the value of their property. And again, we want to be held harmless. Does that make sense to you? Because here we are, we can be selling a particular property. Somebody makes an offer, you know, selling a garage. Someone makes an offer and they're going to buy it for $450,000. Now, everybody's happy, the buyer's happy, the seller's happy. Oh, this is going to be great. We just need to do inspection, blah, 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 blah. And then the buyer does inspection, finds out there's all kinds of environmental, oil's been there, gas has been there, all this cleanup needs to be done. And now the property is only worth $250,000. And then do you think it's ever been where the seller comes back and says, my agent didn't tell me about the risks of allowing somebody to do an inspection, and so now my property is only worth half and I'm going to sue my agent? You see how that gets very tricky? So you actually, whether you're helping out the seller or helping out the buyer, you need to make sure that you are explaining things correctly, trying to look 2, 3, 4 steps ahead for your client, and then also making sure they understand that they're the boss, they're allowing things or they're not allowing things, they're requesting things or they're not requesting things, and that they're going to hold you harmless, because ultimately you can end up getting in a lot of trouble. So who's got questions on that? Anyone? All
I
right.
might have said this and I might have just spaced out, but would that be in the listing agreement that the brokerage is held harmless?
We have it in our commercial group listing agreement, or sometimes we have to add it depending on what kind of commercial property it is. But also you should have that discussion with them. You know, I mean, yeah, it's in the agreement, but you want to make sure they understand. And depending on what broker you go to, you know, maybe your broker has it, maybe they don't, maybe you don't do, you know, that's where it gets tricky. Maybe you sold like 5, 10 houses and now you think you can't, and again, not you personally, but someone sells like 5 or 10 houses. Now they think they know everything about real estate. And now somebody wants them to sell like a garage and they're like, oh yeah, no problem, I can do that. And before you know it, they're maybe using residential documents to sell a commercial property, because people do that kind of stuff all the time. And then they don't really have everything correct the way they need to. So just be careful about all that stuff, because it does get pretty crazy. Hope that kind of answers your question. So it's not like a set thing for every single person, every single real estate agent, every single broker, you know. So, and also, you know, it's going to affect insurance carriers and lenders and all that other good stuff. So again, we as the real estate professionals, we're not expected to have the technical expertise, but we are presumed. That's the whole thing, where people presume or assume that we know this stuff and that we are supposed to be working, of course, in their best interest. So you might have to get other people involved, like environmental auditors, right? scientific or technical experts who can provide the most studies for people. They might be doing soil testing, water testing, structures, and so forth. An environmental site assessment, right, may be performed on a property to show that due care was exercised in determining whether any environmental impairments exist. So like even when I bought a 5-unit apartment building, the lender, you know, and even I bought an 8 and I had a 6 and a 5 and an 8. The lenders for those particular properties, they required at least a phase 1 assessment. Okay. So what's a phase 1? Anybody have an idea what's a phase 1? What do they usually do for a phase 1? Anybody been through it or kind of understand a little? So I've never, well, maybe once we had to do a phase 2 for somebody, but really the majority is like a phase 1. Phase 1 is where, again, this particular person who has experience and technical knowledge and so forth, they're going to walk the property. And it could become a concern if, like, even if they walk the property and they see in the driveway there's some oil stains or gasoline stains, or they see that there's a bunch of garbage that has like oil, gas, chemicals, then they could request, or not request, they could recommend that a phase 2 be done. And then if they recommend that a phase 2 be done, which is more about soil and water and environment, a lot of times the lenders will not give the buyer the money to buy the property unless a phase 2 is done, which then becomes a lot more expensive and it opens up a lot more. Okay, so that's the very basics between a phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 includes soil, water, other testing, and so forth. There's what's called an environmental impact statement. Anybody know what that is? Environmental impact statement?
Like the problems that the environment, that the house or whatever the property could have on the environment.
Right, kind of, pretty close. So here's the point, and these are for, like, you know, this takes things to the next level. Somebody has a project, meaning they're building a complex apartment building, commercial space, whatever it is, that's federally funded. They're getting some sort of federal money for that. Well, in a lot of cases, that project, you know, think about like, I don't know, 100 units of apartment building for lower income housing or something that's like a federal grant and so forth. They might require, or they probably will require, an EIS. And this EIS, environmental impact statement, is going to include like air quality, noise, public health, safety, energy consumption, population, density, wildlife, vegetation, sewer, water facilities. It's going to include a lot more info that's going to be needed. All right. And of course, with anything else, you need to understand about disclosing what you know. So if you know that there's mold, you know that there's lead, you know, like you have a lead report, asbestos report, mold report, you have to disclose it, even if your seller doesn't want you to. But if you just think that there's lead there, or you think that there's mold there, or you think that there's asbestos there, and then you start raising the issues after selling the, or when selling the property, then you could be breaking the fiduciary obligations for your seller. Does that make sense? Who's got questions on that sort of thing? So just a quick example is I had this woman in Coventry. She called me up and she wanted me to sell her property. So I go over there and I just felt and smelt and just felt like there was like moldiness in the house, like moisture. It was a hot summer day, but I wasn't exactly sure. And I'm not going to put a property on the market unless I do a walkthrough of it, right? I want to know what I'm selling. So I look around the whole house, it's nice, and we're gonna go in the basement, you know, before we sign the paperwork, because she's like, oh, let's just get this going. I need to sell ASAP and da 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 da. And I appreciate you coming out here. And she was nice as pie. And I said, all right, well, let me just take a quick walk through the basement. Oh no, you don't have to go down there. You don't have to go down. I said, I'm sorry, but I really do have to go down there because that way I can explain to people, you know, how the basement is if they ask me, or some of the, you know, the features about the house. Oh, no. And I said, well, do you mind? Because I really do, in order for us to sell the property. She's like, okay. So I go down the stairs. She's like, oh, that's far enough. That's fine. And I see way in the corner. And again, I smell the mold, and then, you know, I'm just going like this. And she, like my wife, she's like a hound dog. She'll come with me once in a great while to property, you know, when we're just like walking through or something. And she'll, in a second, she starts sneezing. When there's mold in the house, man, she starts sneezing. I'm like, you're the hound dog for mold. Me, I'm just like, oh, something's not right here. But anyways, way in the back, there was a bunch of like foam stuff against the wall. And I said, well, what's over there? She's like, oh, just leave it alone. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But I still took a few steps. And I just noticed there's all kinds of moisture in that back corner. Just thinking about it makes me feel kind of nasty. Moisture, wet, smell, looks like mold and everything. And I said, well, what is that? What's that back there? Oh, don't worry about it. You know, we'll get that cleaned up sooner or later. We'll just sell the property with that, like that. And, you know, we'll give them some money for cleanup. And I sat down with her and I said, listen, I said, if I sell your property, I said, before we even put it on the market, either this has to be 100% cleaned up, or, you know, I have to disclose that there's some sort of moisture, something in that basement. Oh, no, you don't need to tell anybody. That's my business, not yours. And I said, listen, you know, now I said, I'm the single source of income from at the time, you know, I was single. I said, I'm the single source of income for my children, for me and my children. I said, I'm not going to put my license at risk because you're trying to save a couple $1,000 and you don't want me to tell people that that's probably mold, or you don't want to clean it up. I said, so you know, either you're going to clean it up, or I'm telling you straightforwardly that I have to tell people about that, or I just can't sell the property for you. She's like, come on, I really want you to sell it. Just take care of it. And that was actually one of the properties, after talking with her in circles for like 25 minutes, because, you know, I hate to walk away from any kind of deal. But after talking with her 25 minutes, she wasn't budging. I said, I'm sorry, I can't sell your property for you. And so now she's like, was all disappointed, and she actually got a little mad at me. And then that was it. And then like 5 days later, I see it listed by somebody else. And, you know, I'm not that person to be meddling in everybody else's business. I just keep going forward on my own. But I mean, I did have a few, like 2 or 3 buyers, and I told them, hey, I'll show you the property if you want, but I'm telling you right now, in the basement, in the back corner, there's some kind of issue there. And I think it might be mold. Do you still want to look at it? And like, you know, because I had called the other agent who had the property list, and I'm like, hey, did they clean out the basement? She's like, oh, no, they haven't done anything. And you know, the property ended up selling for probably like $20,000 less than what we could have sold it at. And the lady probably only had to spend like $2,000 to get it all cleaned up. So that's my long story experience of like dealing with mold and that sort of thing. Who's got questions about environmental issues and the real property transaction, real estate transaction? Anyone? All right, well, get out your favorite pencil and a blank piece of paper. It's time to do a quiz in a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's go over some of these and see what you think. Number 1, individuals have suffered all of these health problems due to exposure to formaldehyde, except, what do you like?
C.
What do you like?
C.
You like anybody else? All right, so will formaldehyde cause a mold infection? No. So the answer is C as in Charlie. It'll cause maybe asthma, eye irritations, or burning in the throat, but it's not going to cause a mold infection. Number 2, lead is commonly found in all of these except
D. D
Anybody
is
else?
D is in dog.
You got it. Insulating material, that's not going to probably have lead. Number 3, a seller accepts an offer on her home, which was built in 1892. Which of these statements about lead-based paint is false? What do you like?
A.
Anyone else?
C.
Right. False.
Charlie.
All right, you got it. See, why? Because it's the seller, right? It's the buyer that has 10 days to obtain one, not the seller. You see how they try to be tricky with you?
Yes. Sorry.
Number 4, that's all right. Where in the United States does radon occur?
See?
D. Number 5, which of these have been proven to pose a health hazard?
D.
As in dog.
You got it, all of them. Number 6, here he stores toxic chemical waste in a large steel tank that only has 15% of its volume underground. Jenna lives in the wilderness and has her own gas pump connected to a 1,500-gallon tank of gasoline buried 10 feet underground. Lars keeps 3 large tanks filled with formaldehyde and battery acid in his basement. Which of these people are covered by the federal regulations?
Bravo.
That's right. B. Why? Because first of all, Harry is what? More than 10%, right? And then why Jenna? Because it's complete.
Because hers is over 1,100.
Yep, and it's completely underground, right? Has her own gas plant buried 10 feet underground. All right, number 7. Which of these is responsible for administering the super fund?
See?
Well, CERCLA is kind of like the law. CERCLA is the law. Who's responsible?
Who?
A.
You got it. APA, number 7. Number 8. Which of these would disqualify someone from claiming innocent landowner immunity under the Superfund Amendment and Reauthorization Act under Sarah?
C. As in cat.
Anybody else?
Charlie.
D.
You got it. C.
D.
Only constructive knowledge. So that's like basically landowners cannot claim innocent landowner immunity if they had actual or constructive. So that's saying only constructive. So that would not disqualify. Number 9, if a PRP refuses to pay the expenses, what happens? What do you like?
A.
Bravo.
B as in boy, civil action and awarded 3 times the actual cost. Number 10, sealing off asbestos instead of removing it is called what?
A.
A.
You got it. Number 11, lead-based paint is found in 75% of all private housing built before what?
A.
A.
You got it. Which of these is the byproduct of fuel combustion that may result in death if such equipment is not properly vented?
D.
D. Number 13, at least how much of a tank must be underground for it to be considered underground storage tank?
A.
A. 10%. Number 14, how can property owners help avoid carbon monoxide exposure?
A. A.
A.
A.
You got it. 15, which of these is a source of PCBs?
B. B.
D is in cat.
B. As in boy.
Charlie.
B, caulking compound specifically. Yep, a little bit tricky, but remember when you see or hear the word compound, right? They take over 200 chemicals and put it together. Number 16, why is mold a serious environmental problem in buildings?
B.
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 Number 17, what is the purpose of the Brownfields law enacted in 2002?
D as in dog.
That's right. Clean them up. Clean them up. And then number 18, what causes mold problems in buildings?
B as in boy.
You got it. So each one is a little bit more than 5 to 6 points. If you got more than 3 or 4 wrong, my friends, you need to do some studying. All right, sound about right for everybody?
Yes.
Okay.